I'm with Elana Heideman from Israel Forever Foundation, and we're talking about the hostages. It's nearly 11 months since they were kidnapped by terrorist group Hamas. What happened yesterday?
Well, yesterday it was announced that they had discovered the bodies of six hostages in a tunnel only 1 kilometer away from where they had rescued the Bedouin Muslim hostage that was recovered a week prior, about a kilometer away, as I mentioned. And unfortunately, it has been discovered and shared with the world that these six hostages were executed mercilessly as the IDF approached within, they believe, between 36 to 48 hours prior to their being recovered by our brave soldiers. So it's a very devastating time that all of these hostages had been alive all these hundreds and hundreds of days while the world has sat silently, only to be murdered as they are hours away from being saved.
Mm. How has the nation of Israel responded to this?
I can tell you that there is not a full heart in the world that is not moved and pained and heartbroken. Many people would say that they feel like they're experiencing October 7th all over again because of the utter shock at the brutality that these so-called human beings, these terrorists, are treating our innocent civilians. Everybody is heartbroken. The entire nation is in mourning. Jews around the world are in mourning. There are many memorial ceremonies that are taking place. Yesterday and today, we have the funerals. And of course, it's important to mention that on the very same day, there was another terror attack where three individuals were murdered, three security individuals, and one of them is the father of a policewoman, one of the only police women who were murdered on October 7th in the terrible battle that took place at the Sderot police station. So we're burying many of our family members, and there is not really a feeling of how we can overcome this, but we know we will. It's also created division, many people who want to point a finger of blame. And it's very crucial for people outside of Israel to understand that the all of the rallies that are taking place, some have been politicized, but many are simply solidarity rallies with the families of the hostages, with the soldiers who are continuing to serve. So we see a lot of awakening of people here in Israel. Unfortunately, we wish we saw more awakening of people around the world as a result of these catastrophic murders. They were literally just executed because their freedom was imminent. So it's a very tough time.
Are we seeing protests and demonstrations on the street? And is there a strike today?
Yes, we see that some of Israel has striked today. Unfortunately, the head of the Histadrut, the labor unions, he saw himself in a position to shut down Israel's economy in protest. Whereas there are many who say that that is what damages not only our image, but our society even more. And that his decision was actually illegal because it was motivated by a political siding, a political bias. So while we're seeing many protests and demonstrations, we are also having to recognize that that's actually a small percentage of the Israeli society. And it's being reported in the news as if it's the majority, but it is not. You have the majority of the nation of Israel who is standing by the need for this just war in order for our defense systems to be able to defeat the forever war that the Arabs are putting upon the Jewish people today. So you see reactions of every kind. You also see a tremendous outpouring of love and brotherhood and camaraderie. I myself was at Hadassah Hospital today, and you see Arab and Jewish doctors and nurses and patients, and there is an understanding amongst everyone right now that this takes us really beyond the level of what anyone could have expected, even from the evil Hamasniks and their horrible Nazi style of behavior against the Jews. It's really a difficult time, Paul, and I hope that all of your listeners are able to understand, even from a distance, just how fragile we all are here.
Is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responsible for the deaths of these people because he didn't get a peace deal, or is it just solely on Hamas?
the tendency to blame Bibi Netanyahu for the failure to bring peace is nothing other than a witch hunt. Nobody loves any major leader, and any major leader in war, as we know throughout history, has good and bad, has successes and failures. And our prime minister is similarly in a position of catch-22. He cannot win. Is their murder his fault? Absolutely not. We have done absolutely everything to try and bring peace to this situation. But unfortunately, the international bodies have empowered Hamas as the deciding factor for all of the negotiations. The responsibility for these murders rests on Hamas, but not only. It also rests on the United Nations and the International Red Cross, and it rests on all of the nations of the world who have continued to empower Hamas, who have continued to give in and appease the terrorist demands. And we have to admit that there is a lot of responsibility put on the major countries throughout the West, including the United States. Israel was told not to go into Rafah again and again, and they delayed the entry into Rafah by many weeks. And it is as a result of those failures and those diplomatic failing of understanding the war that we have to fight that led to Hamas's empowerment, continued empowerment. And it was that empowerment that led these individuals to execute point blank these 6 hostages, and we cannot yet know how many others. We do know that there have been reports from the forensics that their bodies were mutilated nearly beyond recognition. They did not just shoot them and run. They did not kill them weeks ago. On Friday, the families of the hostages stood with large loudspeakers. They actually had a run. They ran to the Gaza border where there were large loudspeakers set up, and they called out to their families. And there are some who speculate that it is that love of life that we as Jews have that disturbed them so much that they were compelled to take that life. As Hirsch's mom and the mom of Carmel Gat and the families of each of these, Alex Dubnov and others who were murdered on this terrible tragedy, this terrible evidence of how evil Hamas is. And only when the world starts speaking about that evil, only then will there be peace. So as much as everyone wants to blame Bibi, isn't it incredible that there actually is a leader who will just let it all wash over him in a way? Continue to criticize, and he'll continue to do what's needed. And so will the rest of our army, and so will the rest of our government, whether we like them or not. We do not agree with all of them. We do not agree with their decisions. We wish that they were doing more. But we are armchair diplomats while they are out there making the decisions that are impossible. I think that it behooves everyone to suspend any of that judgment and try to approach our situation from the perspective of how you can help Israel and the Jewish people outlast this onslaught and attempt at genocide.
Now, Israel has released Palestinian prisoners in exchange to get some hostages out. Have any of those released prisoners from the Palestinian side gone back to terrorism?
Nearly all have returned to terror, according to many of the reports. And most recently, we see that those committing terror acts around the country were even released in the most recent exchange for our hostages. But of course, the most famous of them all would be Sinwar himself, who was released in the deal with Gilad Shalit. And having truly become an expert on Israeli policies while in Israel's prisons, he has now become the head of Hamas after Israel succeeded in taking out Ismail Haniyeh in the targeted assassination. So Sinwar is, I would have to say, one of. Another would be Mohammed Daif, who was recently executed, assassinated in a targeted assassination as well. So Sinwar remains one of the last living, and And Marwan Barghouti, his name is currently on the list to be released in the next hostage exchange. However, 4 of the 6 hostages who were just executed were also on the list to be exchanged for terrorists. So right now, that discussion is being called to a halt, whereas one side, the Hostages Families Forum, is calling for ceasefire at any price and an exchange, a deal exchange so that, for the return of our remaining hostages. Is the Tikva Forum of hostage families that believes very strongly that any release of Palestinian terrorists from Israel's jails, they will only return to terror because we know it to be true.
It's a bit of a quandary, isn't it? Which is more important, releasing terrorists with blood on their hands or actually getting your hostages back? I can imagine as a family, you want your loved one back, so you'll do anything. But it's a very difficult situation, isn't it?
Well, that is very much why there's a large majority of people who do believe that it is the responsibility of the government to fight this war that needs to be fought to eliminate Hamas. The release of terrorists only continues to empower Hamas in their belief that they have held for many and all Palestinian units since their inception in the late 1960s, early 70s. I mean, this is a new movement. The whole idea of the Palestinian being an identity is something that is relatively new in our time. They've just fabricated their history so much that they even claim to be descendants of the Canaanites. I mean, it's so inane. It's so ridiculous of a claim. But in a godless world, they don't care how they twist the historical truth that we know from the Bible. So the reality of the on the ground situation is that it is in the soldiers' hands to bring those hostages home. That kind of pressure is the only kind of pressure that this terror society can understand. And I know that that's hard to hear. Nobody wants to believe that all Gazans are terrorists. But we now have new information regarding October 7th, which is that there were nearly 8,000 terrorists who infiltrated the borders at 119 different spots. And out of those 8,000, only maybe 3,000 of them are identified as terrorists and members of Hamas, the Nukhba, this militant unit. The rest were innocent civilians of Gaza. And we've seen, for those of you who have not, we've seen the videos of the old man on his crutch, making his way through the destroyed border fence, smiling and laughing. And we know the stories of children who took part not only in murders, but in the rape of women and young children. So it's very, very difficult for us to continue to empower the idea of a Palestine, a Palestinian state, a Palestinian culture, a Palestinian entity that is based on anything other than the thirst for Jewish blood, the elimination of the Jew, the elimination of Israel, and essentially as a part of the Pan-Arab goal that is exposing itself now in the jihadism through the United States, Canada, England, France, Australia, pick a country. It is on the rise. And this is what the world needs to see, that we are fighting. And Israel's fight against Hamas is only the first battle of what will become humanity's fight against evil. And that evil is unfortunately embodied by extremist Islam.
Now, one of those who was murdered was American Hirsch Goldberg, Polin. He was in a Hamas video fairly recently, last few months, wasn't he?
Yes, just about 100 days ago, I believe. He was featured. He was featured as a part of the psychological torture that Hamas has continued since day one by live streaming. And actually, recently, the IDF discovered secret documents in Sinwar's, in his cave in the tunnels, in his area in the tunnels. They found all of the instructions of how they were supposed to continue with as many videos of the hostages and as many videos of the tortures and as many videos of the murders as much as possible, because it was a form of continued torture of what they call the Zionist enemy. Of course, Zionist is simply another word for Jew. that has been co-opted by the movements in order to make their anti-Semitism somewhat legitimized because it's targeted at those who are associated with Israel. But I think that it's important for us to recognize that Hirsch's story did speak to so many people because his parents being American, English speakers, and of the tremendous strength of his amazing mother in particular, as well as his father, of course, both of them being so outspoken, traveling everywhere around the world, demanding more. And yet, after 328 days, you have to question why? Why put your heart out there if a world is not going to listen?
Mm.
Hirsch's story is very powerful also for many other reasons. He was in a safe room with Aner Shapira, one of his childhood best friends, who miraculously saved those who were inside of the safe shelter, this roadside shelter, because he threw out 7 of the grenades that had been thrown in. He himself was killed at the 7th grenade, I believe, and then they came in. That 7th grenade blew off Hirsch's arm, and many of the people inside were killed, and Hirsch and others were kidnapped. You know, his story touched many hearts, and Rachel and John touched many hearts with their ability to be outspoken around the world, even most recently at the Democratic National Convention, where you saw their humanity on display. You saw their honesty and their integrity as the parents of this hostage. And the entirety of the Democratic National Convention shouts out, just as at the Republican National Convention in the days prior, where a different hostage family had spoken. Each side shouting out, bring them home, bring them home. And yet the United States government did very little in terms of putting pressure on Hamas. All of the pressure has been put on Israel throughout this entire time. And unfortunately, we have to also recognize that even after Hirsch's body was rescued, and it's important to not say he was freed, he was not died. No, his murdered and executed and mutilated body was rescued by Israeli soldiers of defense. And the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, has not issued anything. This tells us a lot about the state of the world, that we can use the stories to only when it suits us, when it gives us attention. But as you saw, perhaps the current Democratic vice presidential candidate was asked in a press circle, was asked his reaction about the recovery of these bodies, including one American, and he offered no comment and walked away with his ice cream milkshake in his hand. Mm-hmm. So the indifference is deafening and heartbreaking.
Mm. Rachel Goldberg's been like a real hero, hasn't she?
Oh, incredible, incredible.
And it's so sad that her son has actually finally been murdered.
Indeed it is. The family has requested now that they be given privacy after over 328 days of public life. Rachel gave many people hope. She insisted on keeping that hope alive. She was the one who launched the initiative to wear the number every day. And I want to encourage people to continue to do that, even though she has gone into mourning with the discovery of her son's murdered body being returned. Let them mourn. Let them have that peace. But let's carry on the kind of strength that Rachel and John and so many of the other parents of the hostage families are giving us. Let's not be dissuaded by those who are determined to politicize and to riot and to light things on fire. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in Israel. We are suffering a divided society, and our entire society is aching right along with each one of those families. So we have to take their lessons and their strength and keep carrying it onward. There are 101 hostages that remain in captivity, being brutalized by the evil of Hamas, which is today's Amalek. It is today's evil amongst good human beings, and every good human person in the world must find a way to do more. There's so much more we can be doing. Every person can host a private gathering, can go to their schools. Schools are now the hotbed. And right now in the media, it's all about the colleges, but people are ignoring what's happening in high schools and what's happening in the workplace. And there is more that each one of you can be doing. Fight for the rights of Jews, and you will be fighting for the freedom of all humanity, because what happens to the Jews will not end with the Jews.
Do you fear for the rest of the hostages' lives?
I do. We know at this point that there are likely only 40 remaining alive. That's a random number that people speculate. We fear for all of their lives. There have been a lot of attempts at psychological torture, including that of the Bibas family. We have no proof of life. The Red Cross and the United Nations and the World Health Organization have demanded polio vaccines for all of the Gazan children. But our 2 children who are there captive, they will not be getting that polio vaccine. And by the way, it's important to emphasize there was 1 case of polio that was detected, and yet somehow it became the most urgent and most important issue of the day, because it's a part, again, of the psychological terror that Hamas and the world continue to impose on Israel. So we're afraid for our girls. There remain over 10, I believe now it's 10, 12 girls, women who we fear. We fear for them being pregnant. We fear for the babies to be kidnapped. We fear for them to then murder them after that birth and to steal our babies. Fears are how we're living right now. And so we do have to learn from someone like Rachel, who could be so inspiring and can give so many hope. I hope you'll forgive my broken voice. It's very hard to separate our emotion out from the issues that we're facing today.
Is the Bible a comfort during these difficult days?
I think for some. I think only for some. I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest. I think that for the religious community, the observant, ultra-Orthodox or traditional communities, knowing that on Shabbat we come together and we hear the Torah and we bring those words into us, then yes, it can be a source of strength. Every week there is something so powerful that connects with what we're going through. However, on the whole, I can't say that the Bible is giving people encouragement or strength right now. I would say prayer, however, is giving people strength. There was somebody who wrote that they couldn't get out, citing the Shema, the Jewish prayer of oneness of God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And that's the prayer that we believe we recite right before we die. And we recite it in the morning and we recite it at night before we go to sleep. And you could just have this terrible image in our heads of these tortured souls living all those days only to be executed. The prayers that must have come off of their lips. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking. Excuse me.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you're doing to actually help and encourage your community at this time?
My organization is called Israel Forever. And Israel, as we define it, is not just about our current modern state and its borders, but it is about the ancient legacy and destiny of the people, the land, and the heritage of the nation of Israel. And so israelforever.org is a website that we have curated to aid anyone in the world who is looking for information, engagement, inspiration, and true ways for personal activism. We offer a wide range of services, including concierge program development to meet any community's needs. But we also provide for our global community of virtual citizens of Israel. We provide endless resources and materials that can help people stay connected, informed, and motivated. It's really what we need. We need to mobilize the world to understand that Israel is forever. And we have to be a part of that. What are we doing right now? We are helping people on the ground in Israel by sharing the support of those in the diaspora who send us letters of friendship, who donate to our many causes and help us give directly to communities here in Israel who are in desperate need of that kind of humanitarian support. A reminder that Israelis receive nearly no humanitarian aid from countries or bodies around the world, whereas billions and billions and billions are poured into Gaza and stolen by the terrorist organizations, of which Hamas, honestly, is only one. The pay for slay program that also exists by the Palestinian Authority, where terrorists get honored, their families get rewarded financially. This is something very important where many of these humanitarian funds are going. But Israelis, no, we don't get it. So we get the love, the blessings from Jews and non-Jews around the world, and we try to share those with the Israelis directly. We also provide therapeutic activities even for those in the diaspora who are looking to feel more, to learn more, and to do more. Our social media activism is off the charts. We want to empower everyone with the strongest information and memes and infographics and materials that you can use to share onward. So please come and follow Israel Forever, Israel Forever Foundation, israelforever.org. And we hope that you will join our global community and fight for the rights of all humanity by being a virtual citizen of Israel.
Well, Elana, thank you very much for sharing today during this very difficult time in the land.
Thank you, Paul. I hope that there are hearts everywhere that are breaking and therefore finding new inspiration and new light, because that is what these departed souls, these murdered spirits, they would want from us.